Today's episode is sponsored by Vitality Health RX Supplements. Whether you're an athlete, a busy professional, or just someone looking to prioritize health, Vitality Health RX has what you need. With premium ingredients and rigorous quality control, their supplements support your body's natural functions. Visit shopvrx.com and use code FEELGREAT15 for 15% off your first order. Thanks to Vitality Health RX for sponsoring this episode. Now let's dive in.
Welcome to the Feel Better, Feel Great podcast, episode 119, Eat More Fat. I am Dr. Andrea McSwain. Before we delve into today's podcast, I want to remind you that I am a medical professional, but this information is to be intended for educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for personalized medical diagnosis or treatment. Always consult with your healthcare provider for guidance tailored to your specific health needs. Now let's embark on this journey together. Eat more fat. This is a saying I say a lot in my clinic when people come to see me. I say you need to eat more fat. And they have this feeling of uneasiness because they've been hearing that eating fat is not good for them. So when I say eat more fat, they don't know why I would say that to them because fat has been demonized in our society. And I want to walk you through that today. I want to walk you through how much we can really learn from using fat as a macronutrient to help our body heal. So in the beginning, in the 1960s, as there was a lot more politics related to food in the food industry, there were Senate hearings and negotiations about what foods were good for you and what were not. And so the three macronutrients seemed to be on trial. There were carbohydrates, which are sugars, there were fats, and there were proteins. So really fats and carbohydrates started to appear as which one was more problematic for American society. And fats were demonized. So in essence, carbs won. We started going into a low-fat society. So low-fat milk, low-fat cottage cheese, low-fat other dairy products. And really then we started going into a very high-carb, simple sugar, cereal, highly processed juices that lack nutrients but have a lot of sugar. Then we started looking at all these very carb-friendly, low-fat diets. And what happened is we ended up depleting ourselves of a very important macronutrient. And now we're starting to move into a different direction about macronutrients. And we're also starting to recognize that this information that came to us almost 60 years ago was highly politicized and much to the detriment of our society. I will tell you that when we look at demonizing foods, it's not in our best interest. So I'm going to say that a lot of times also in my practice, I say, don't be afraid to eat. Don't be afraid of foods. And I'll talk about that in another podcast. But this idea that we should look at a macronutrient, so macro meaning major nutrient, and we should decide that that is not good for us is not science-based. We have three macronutrients: fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. And we do need a balance of them. So let's walk into a little bit more information. First of all, I just want to explain a little bit more about the food politics. So then the next idea is, okay, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention looks at the food pyramid or the food table or the food plate. People who are around that decision-making process are very much the politicians related to the food industry. And they are determining the placement of the icons on the table as they relate to other icons, or they're relating to the organization of the food table. And so while this information may possibly be helpful about how much macronutrients to dose, it's in general very politically motivated. But what I want to recommend to you is that we need to look at some ways to get healthy fats into your diet. There are a lot of conversations that we need to have about the other macronutrients of carbohydrates and proteins, but today we're going to say eat more fat. And that's going to take me back into my clinic, okay? Because when I see people that have nerve dysfunction, right? They have really awful conditions with their skin. Their body isn't really able to thermoregulate. There's a lot of things that go on with nerve health and building cellular repair. They have extreme fatigue at the cellular level. And a lot of times it's because they've been stuck on a low-fat diet, or they're struggling with absorption of fat in their body. So those are some things that I see clinically. And maybe I can share some other situations, but basically what I like to do at first with my clinic is run a metabolic panel. It's a blood test offered to my patients, and the first part of the test is a very simple lipid profile. Many people have their lipids done. It's a fasting test. It looks at total cholesterol, and then subparticles of LDL, HDL, triglycerides. And when I look at those, I look at them very differently. They are the very first page of the metabolic panel that I do with my patients, and I look at total cholesterol because oftentimes that number is very low. And very, very low, I mean less than 200. But most people are concerned about total cholesterol being too high. And yes, there are genetic predispositions to elevated total cholesterol. However, to date, I've only met one person. She was a co-medical student. Her cholesterol, total cholesterol, was in the 500s. She had one of the 5 genetic predispositions to elevated cholesterol. She is the only one I have ever met. And her total cholesterol, like I said, was over 500 consistently. She was a brick house. I mean, she was strong. She was built. She could do anything athletically. And she had an extremely high genetic propensity towards accumulating cholesterol. That is the only person I've met. Most of the time, I meet people who have decent ranges of cholesterol, total cholesterol, meaning they have about 200 to 230. So you'd say, oh, well, 230 is high because it should be 200 or less. Well, that's really about a 10 to 12% difference approximately. So that's not a large number to be that off, if you will, from a perfect ideal cholesterol, which again, I don't exactly agree with, because when people have cholesterol needs, then their body needs to actually have cholesterol available to them. So this takes me into the idea of, why does your body keep cholesterol around? It keeps it around for repair. If you're in a high state of inflammation and you don't have the repair molecules of good healthy fats, your body will not be able to repair. And that's your skin, your nerves, including your brain. That is your cell membrane. That is providing support for your hormones. So cholesterol is very beneficial for all of those repair aspects, and actually just the structure of the different parts of our body. There's a lot of parts of our body that are made from fat. That's very important. When I look at the next level, I look at LDL. So there was a very important journal article in 2014, Journal of Critical Care Medicine, July of 2014. This was examining what is often called the bad cholesterol. Again, LDL. Now, this might be very surprising to you, but what this critical landmark study showed was that in the intensive care unit, if people had an LDL less than 110 and they had a heart attack, they had a clinical and statistically significant elevation in death 30 days after a heart attack. So what does that mean? LDL needs to be at 110. Because if it is less than 110, then the body has a significant problem with repair. If you are struggling with heart disease and you are using medication that lowers your LDL, it can bring it down very, very low. And then you have to wonder, well, how do I repair? Okay, so that's very important. And there are medications that bring LDL down significantly. Recognizing, okay, my LDL is down, what am I going to repair? And there is a reason why people look at the genetic testing actually for some of these medicines. So you might say, well, what are some of those medicines? And they're statins. Statins will drive LDL down. It will drive LDL down, And one of the genetic predispositions that can be tested is if you are susceptible for myopathy or muscle pain secondary to use with a statin, meaning if you're driving the LDL down and you're having significant muscle pain because you can't have enough repair in your muscles because you need LDL and you're taking a statin, you may have found the reason for why you're hurting. Next, I want to talk about HDL, often considered the good cholesterol. And it is good cholesterol, right? High density lipids. But if it's elevated over 60, it's actually a marker for inflammation. And why is that? Because inflammation shows that we need more repair. So your body's going to keep these levels higher if you're in need of that repair. And your next subparticle of conversation today is triglycerides. Triglycerides are fluctuant. They have a 72-hour window when you evaluate them. So in dating a med student who had 400 on his triglycerides, he was notified that probably that pizza and beer that he'd had over the last 72 hours did not do him any good. Go home, clean up his diet for a week, come back and get his lipids or his triglycerides tested, and they were in normal range. Now, that can be true, but for some people who have chronic inflammation, they might have very, very elevated triglycerides. But it's again because the body is sequestering these lipids to help with repair, especially in light of inflammation or increased demands on the body, like stress or executive stress. The other thing I want you to know about with lipids and the biomarkers that I've discussed here is when LDL goes down, triglycerides will go up. They have an inverse relationship because the body needs fats for repair. So eat more fat. The next thing I want to go into with markers and biomarkers is, oh my gosh, she's told me to eat more fat, but I'm afraid my blood vessels are going to get clogged. Okay, well, guess what? There's biomarkers for that. And that's as I go into explaining this with my patients, I look at 3 significant biomarkers for vascular inflammation. These are on the progression for acute coronary syndrome. Now, if you came into the ER, you would have some testing done in the ER that would look at vascular information and inflammation. Okay, and those are usually troponin and CKMB. However, vascular disease progression can be evaluated with other biomarkers. Those biomarkers are hsCRP, MPO, and LPPLA2. We will have more information for this in our show notes, so make sure you check that out, or our blog related to this topic, and also some really important images to show you the blood vessel. So as the blood vessel has disease progression, the wall will inflame, it will thicken, it will have calcification, and then with the inflammation, it makes the wall start to accumulate cholesterol or plaque formation. Then eventually that, along with thickened blood, can then lead to things like acute coronary syndrome or even stroke. Okay, so I'm very well aware of the fact that the blood vessels need to have minimal inflammation. We need to make sure we keep the calcium and the hardening of the arteries minimized. And also, plaque can form in the blood vessels. So we make sure to test these 3 markers, hsCRP and MPO and LPPLA2, before the progression of someone going into the emergency room and having these end markers tested of CKMB and troponin. So that's the way we handle preventative medicine, because if we do see those numbers elevated, that's an important way to understand. Now, that I will tell you as a side note and a very important tip, magnesium is the only known substance that actually reverses plaque formation. And this has been recognized by the American Cardiac Association, or the ACA. So you need to be aware of that, because if you are looking at hardened arteries, we want to think about magnesium. I can tell you to eat more fat, and at the same time, I can show you biomarkers that have been around for more than 15 years that will actually show you that eating more fat is not going to clog your arteries. Instead, that fat is going to go into other areas of the body to heal and repair. Okay. Then I want to talk about what are healthy fats. So healthy fats in general are plant-based, served at room temperature. Those are healthy fats. So avocados, your nuts and seeds in general, those are all healthy fats for you. And then your oils are best served at room temperature. So if you're going to cook something in a pan, add water, and then when it's cooked, add oil at the top of it. You can put, and then your healthy oils do so much good to actually mobilize more nutrients in your body, because most nutrients like to be transported in fat to improve absorption. And the term we use in supplements and such is called liposomal. Liposomal means encased in lipo, which is encased in fat. So you might have liposomal vitamin C, liposomal glutathione. There's many ways to encase nutrients in fat so you can improve their absorption. So I want you to encase your plants and your plant-based eating in fats and eat fats in those plants to help your body be able to improve and heal. Okay, what are unhealthy fats in general? Animal-based fats or foods that are at high temperature or fried. So fats that are at very elevated temperature and also animal fats, you need to be careful for how much you include those in your diet. One of the ways that fats can impact us is with the different organs, and I'll go on into that in a few minutes. But then I want to talk about other ways specifically to support fat supplementation. So we've all heard of the omega chains, and there's many omegas, but the most important ones in general are 3, 6, 9. Omega-3s are very calming. When they are in the body, your body's actually able to reduce the simmering or the post-inflammatory consequences with omega-3s. Omega-3s have kind of 3 main categories: EPA, DHA, ALA. EPA, DHA come from fish. And yes, you need good quality sources of fish. It's very difficult to find. And that's why we eagerly encourage people to use supplementation from Vitality Health RX with our optimal omegas, because the extraction of those fish oils is optimizing to help those omega-3 levels go up and help the body heal. The other omega-3 is ALA, alpha-linoleic acid, and that is a plant-based omega-3, also very calming, and you can get those in non-hormone modulating, which is chia seeds, my favorite, 1 to 2 tablespoons a day in water or liquid so they can absorb that nutrient. Walnuts are wonderful for ALA, and then a hormone modulating estrogen-based ALA is flaxseed or flaxseed oil. So those are some ways to actually reduce the simmering effect of chronic inflammation, making sure you get your fish oils in and your ALA in, which is chia seeds primarily is my recommendation. The omega-6s are wonderful for our acute inflammatory response. However, most of the time I see in my labs that those omega-6s are already elevated. I usually discourage people from supplementing with a product that includes omega-6s, because usually people already have a chronic inflammation if they have a problem with any of their organs. So while you're eating more fats, you do need to be a little bit more considerate of reducing your omega-6s. There are omega-6s that are plant-based, and one of those is hemp. So hemp seed oil, they're a wonderful way to promote inflammation in your body so you can mount a response against infections. But you need to be very, very careful if you already have high levels of inflammation. So it is a fat. It's important. It's kind of a side note. In general, you want your omega-3 fish oils, and they're not all created equal. That's very important to consider. Okay, so when you think about omega-3s, make sure you're thinking about extraction and of quality. And then you also have to consider a ratio. So 3 to 2 is my ratio for EPA to DHA in general. But I always recommend getting labs on these biomarkers so you can understand where you're at, because you might need more of one than the other. That can happen occasionally. But again, these imbalances of fatty acids are so paramount to correcting problems in your body. So when you eat more fat, that might include supplementation for you, and that's okay. So yes, good healthy fish chia seeds, and then be a little bit cautious of things that are omega-6s, avoiding supplementation unless you're working with a physician who understands those things, and then even looking at foods that are high in omega-6s and making sure you use them sparingly unless you know your levels of, for example, arachidonic acid. So the other thing is looking at MCT, so medium chain triglycerides. They do very well. They feed the microbiome for the gut. There's a lot of benefits to MCTs. Oftentimes, you can also just include good healthy fats like coconut oil. Okay. Again, your avocados, things like that. And that's the oral ingestion of those. I want to go quickly to omega-9s. Omega-9s are present in olive oil, and I often call that testosterone oil because omega-9s help with that hormone development. Fats, we really want to emphasize that part. Fatty acids is actually just the chemistry description because of some of the molecular composition. So it's not that it's acidic. It's just called a fatty acid. So just so you understand that, you're not contributing to acidity when you're using fatty acids. Now I want to go a little bit into some understanding of the fats as they relate to different organs. Okay, so fats as they relate to skin. I was watching on Instagram recently NPR Health, NPR Medicine, and it showed a dermatologic condition where the back of the upper arm was bumpy and red, and it was called chicken skin. I'd never heard that term, chicken skin. When I looked at the photo, it was a fatty acid imbalance. It was a fatty acid deficiency, excuse me. Those red bumps in the back of the upper arm are indicative of an area that has a lot of turnover because there's often a lot of fluid stored in that area of the triceps or the back of the upper arm. And so fatty acid deficiencies can happen there and people get this red bumpy skin. Well, that's a sign of a nutrient deficiency related to the skin. It's very important. If it's happening in the skin, it's happening throughout the whole body. Now let's look at another area related to fats as they relate to animal products and the liver. So the liver is very susceptible to getting clogged with waste products like unhealthy fats. And that's something that people sometimes see a little bit in elevated liver enzymes, which can then go to something called fatty liver disease as it progresses. And I will tell you, a lot of times fatty liver disease is actually related to alcohol, and that alcohol filtration clogs the liver and there's fatty liver disease. But most important as it relates to this topic is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. One of the major components of developing non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, it's often cited to be eating pork products. So bacon, pork chops, sausage, okay, pork belly. These are things that can contribute to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And that is a very important understanding of how the liver has to process unhealthy products, and it can get clogged, overwhelmed, and have organ-based inflammation, which we can test in biomarkers of the liver enzymes. So I just want to go back to the skin for a minute. I'm sorry I forgot this point. When we look at the skin and the skin is tearing or pulling apart, and this can be anywhere in your skin, particularly this can be a gynecologic issue as well. You want to make sure you are adding healthy fats directly to the skin. So if the skin starts to look very more like paper, you can actually feed your skin good healthy fats with coconut oil. So coconut oil, I prefer you do it before you get in the shower and then get in the shower because you're going to improve your lipid or your fat barrier in your skin to help your skin actually retain that water that's coming in. If you, for example, take a shower or it's just like being out in the sun, it can, especially if it's hot, you can actually end up dehydrating the skin. And then if you're adding oil at the end of the shower, that might be okay, but it might actually, it's not really doing much to help your skin barrier. So those are just some small, subtle tips that might be really important to help you feed your skin. And I really love that idea because we can feed the skin directly with good fats and nourishment. And then what can happen is when we feed the skin, we can help the oral intake of fats go into the other areas that need to be repaired. Just a little tip to kind of help with those ideas. And so I really just kind of want to end on this idea about ancient wisdom. When we look at, how we eat and our pattern of eating, and to create some satiety in our meals, are actually starting with fat-based appetizers, right? So if you want to grab 3 or 4 healthy Kalamata olives as you're starting to cook dinner, or before you prep your dinner or your lunch, or grab those, and you'll be quickly impressed with how satisfied you are, and then how much more you can regulate and control eating your portion for the rest of that meal. Thank you very much. I hope today you had a lot of results-driven insights, and I look forward to our next time together.